Recording. Oh, it's asking, do I want to record in English? Yes, we do. Okay, I think without further ado, Kate, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Amanda, are you ready? Amanda's still trying to find the unmute button.
No. Oh, you can hear me. Stop talking. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Very good.
Rhiannon, you're here. Are you ready?
I am ready, but a heads up in advance, I'm still dealing with an unfolding incident in my NHS workplace. So if I get distracted, that's what's happening.
Do not worry. It's absolutely fine.
Thank you for letting us know. And thank you for giving your time this evening. This evening's about talking about trauma-informed training. And just to share how important this is to the wider legal community, we have got a special video for you.
Silence is coming.
I'm very pleased to be speaking to those of you who are attending this course organised by Lawyers Who Care, focusing on trauma-informed training for you because you've agreed to become a mentor for a young person who is care experienced, who wants to move forward in a career in the law. This is an admirable thing for them to want to do, and a very admirable thing for you to step forward and offer yourself for this role. I've met quite a few care experienced young people over the last few years. Many of them speak of leaving care as equivalent of falling off a cliff in terms of the resources that have been wrapped around them, if that's the right word, in the care system, falling away suddenly when they reach the age of 18, even where there's a so-called care leaving pathway in place. And it is so easy to picture young people, to use that metaphor, falling away from whatever potential they may have. But I've equally met quite a few youngsters who have taken the opposite course. They've used the leaving of care to be a launch pad, set them on a trajectory into a career, not just in law, but in other spaces. Because of the trauma and the experience that all young people will have suffered, both justifying their placement in care and also the trauma of simply being in care, many of them develop a resilience and a determination and want to change the course of their life quite radically. And for that, they need help. And if they want a career in law, they need help from people such as you. When I was young, when I was revising for my A-level, I stayed in a friend's house, and there was a book in the house that I picked up, and it was an early autobiography of Shirley MacLaine, the actress. And the title was one which I gather is a common American expression: you can get there from here. And the message that I took from that is that you can get to where you want to be from wherever you're starting. And that should be the message that we transmit to youngsters who are leaving care. I've used the word admirable twice already, but it's inadequate to describe Lucy Barnes and the charity that she single-handedly has formed. I was dozing over the course of New Year with the radio on, and it was Woman's Hour, not one of my regular listens, and up popped a young trainee barrister, Lucy Barnes, talking about her experience. And so I got in touch with Lucy. I was impressed by what she was saying, and she and I have met, and I'm very keen to support her and to support this endeavour to encourage youngsters and give them as much help as possible to move forward in the law. Now, the course that you're embarked upon, and I'm very grateful to Burgess Salmon for hosting this, is important because although those of you watching this video are seasoned lawyers and will have lots of experience in that world. The youngsters you'll be dealing with aren't coming to you in the same way that many of the young people who we see who are aspiring lawyers come into our offices or chambers for work experience or anything like that. These youngsters have luggage, they have scars, they have been through experiences in their lives which they should not have had to experience. And it's a mistake to approach them as if they are a clean sheet of paper or they are just the same as any other young person. It's important for those looking to help them to understand something of what they might have been through and what the impact is of that on their ability to behave in a professional setting in the way everyone else does and to progress. And so this is a very important course. I'm very sorry I'm not with you because I would be very pleased to go on the course myself. I think we can never learn enough about this, both in terms of trauma generally, but also understanding just how wide the term trauma should be understood. It's not just some appalling awfulness. It's the whole lived experience day by day of being in a situation which is abusive in the widest terms. And that has a corrosive effect, I would anticipate, on a person's integrity, their autonomy, their identity, their feeling of who they are, and their capacity to change matters. And we need to understand as much as we can about that. One key message I think that you will pick up during the course of the day is one that indicates that although you're a mentor, and so that indicates that you will be transmitting wise advice and support, it's equally important to be a good listener, to hear what the young people have to say to you about themselves, about their lives, and for you to have the ability to empathize with them. And that's easy to say. Those are words we'd all nod about when I say them, but it's not so easy to do because as lawyers, we're used to transmitting, actually, and the need to pinch ourselves and simply be quiet and listen is something that we should positively be aiming to do. So I'm very supportive of the whole of this project. I think that youngsters who have had the unwelcome experience of coming through care have something additional to bring to the role of being a lawyer, whatever field of law they may go in. Of course, if they go into family law, they've particularly got insight and understanding to bring to that. But their ability to relate to people, to have their own integrity, to be confident in themselves, to have this resilience that unfortunately from a very young age they've had to develop, should all be seen as positives. And there's absolutely no reason why young people coming out of care should not get there from here, should not get to a career in the law and move forward just as anybody else does. They start at a different point, and it's not the best place to start. And so they need help from people like you, people like me, people like Lucy, to move them on and give them that additional confidence. So I wish you well. I wish you well in the course, but also in what you then move on to do, acting as a mentor for these young people. It's a generous act that you are agreeing to undertake, and I think it will bear a lot of fruit. And I look forward to hearing from Lucy and from others how things have progressed. So thank you.
Oh, amazing. So, I mean, I don't need to tell each of you who that individual is, but we're extremely grateful to Sir Andrew McFarlane for his involvement and his commitment to Lawyers Who Care ever since we launched, since that first initial conversation, Kate, he had with Lucy following Women's Hour, which led to her conversation with you and ultimately led to Lawyers Who Care kind of taking form. So yeah, he's amazing, and we're planning to do lots more work with him in the coming future, especially a potential event this autumn, which you guys will hear all about in the coming months. Kate, before I hand over to you and Amanda, just a couple housekeeping points. There's been a few switch arounds with the agenda, guys. Nothing bad, in fact, great. We do have an addition, which is Gareth Thomas. He's from the Centre of Excellence in Child Trauma. He's going to be talking about peeling back the layers, trauma through the lens of a child in care from their foster parent. And his journey is nothing short of amazing as a foster parent. And he will tell you more about that later on in the evening. So we are breaking for about 6:45 for 15 minutes if we stick to timings, which those of you who know me and Kate, we struggle to do so, but we will try. Zoe, I will promise to try and finish for 8 o'clock so you don't have to rush off. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Kate Aubrey-Johnson and Amanda Muse. Kate, you're muted.
Thank you, Gemma. And thank you, everyone. And for those of you who joined late, please just note that this is being recorded for your benefit in the event you want to go back and have a recap, and for those people who've been unable to join us this evening. So we're here to talk about being trauma informed, and we thought we would start by thinking about what we mean by trauma. And we wondered, because it's online and the easiest way to collect your contributions is, would you like to drop in the chat how you would describe trauma?
Or what you think we mean by trauma. Because so when we do this in person, Lucy's wonderful. It's difficult to do it online. We sort of we invite people to actually think what they think trauma is, and because it's a bit of a buzzword at the moment, and many people think they know what trauma is, and many people believe they're trauma informed. And so I guess our starting point is to ask you what that means to you.
So thank you so much to Zoe for kicking off. So Zoe describes it as a negative and impactful event or series of events which affects a person seriously on a deep level and affects their ongoing experience of the world. A deep state of mental shock from Jonathan Davies-Jones. Negative experiences which have a continuing impact on a person's life from Jonathan Hassan. Paige has said negative experiences that have a lasting impact on someone emotionally. Lizanne, distressing event or experience. And Cleon, the lasting consequences, emotional, physical, mental, of difficult life experiences. Wow, how did they do, Amanda? Oh, there's still more coming in.
So
but thank you. So just finally, Jodie has said a serious impact of a negative experience, and Aisha, a distressing event, continuing event, which impacts on a person's emotional, psychological state over a period of time, and sometimes only a long time after the original incident.
it's brilliant, isn't it? We get different responses each time we do this. Which is really interesting and encouraging. I guess. Oh, look, here we go. Here come up all the myths. So I guess for us, there we are. The most common myth is that trauma is just really about PTSD or some other major event. So being in a war, being in a terrible fire, accident, etc., etc. So I think that what we would say, something along the lines of all significant, I'm going to use the word traumatic events are stressful and distressing, but they may not cause a trauma response in the way that we are thinking about trauma. So in this context, we're thinking of trauma as it changes the way the brain operates and functions. So it changes the neurobiology of the brain and the brain's architecture. And you'll see from Rihanna's slides, she has got some slides of, I think, from the Romanian orphanages, and they graphically show the difference in the brain's architecture of a survivor of trauma to a brain that hasn't been impacted by trauma. Sorry, can we hear me?
Yes.
And one of the other things, so I'm a family practitioner, and almost everybody now in the family courts will say that they are trauma informed and they understand trauma. And generally what they mean is that they understand the parents, the sort of parents I represent, have had a horrible life, and therefore their horrible life will have impacted on them and will change the way they parent. And we just have to be mindful of that. And we can be really nice to them and understanding, but that doesn't, and that's the extent of it. So there's a lack of understanding that it actually changes the way your brain operates. It changes you biologically and physiologically. And I'm always advocating in my cases that the court and practitioners need to make adaptations to take into account someone's traumatic experiences. So it's much more than all the things we've got on the list here. And it's certainly, being trauma informed is certainly not being a therapist or trying to be a therapist. It's just being aware of, I think, as somebody said in the chat, how impactful the ongoing traumatic experiences and the adverse childhood experiences that many of your mentees or many of our mentees will have experienced. But that, what we mean is you take that into account, but we do not patronise, we do not talk down, we do not conclude that somebody cannot be just as a brilliant lawyer or whatever they want to be because of their dreadful life events. Does that help? Is that any questions from that?
I think that's helpful, and I think just to say, being trauma informed slows justice down. Well, actually, if you are trauma informed and you take a process in an appropriate way, in fact, it can be a more efficient way of dealing with matters.
Absolutely.
That absolutely doesn't need to slow matters down. We'll hear more about why actually speaking in a gentle voice, in the way that Amanda just modelled, might actually be more traumatic than less traumatic. And
it's patronising, isn't it? It's
patronising.
But people think that if we just, or maybe speak a little bit more slowly and say, we understand you've had a terrible time. I always use as an example, and Lucy tells me off, that I'd want to punch somebody who spoke to me like that. But it's that sort of triggering of how dare you speak to me like that, and don't. It's inauthentic. It's patronising.
And finally, trauma informed is definitely not woke. So those were the myths we just wanted to start with, and we are privileged and delighted to turn now to Dr. Rhiannon Lewis, who I hope it's okay, Dr. Rhiannon, to allow you to introduce yourself and why you are far better placed than anybody else in this virtual room to talk to us about being trauma informed. Over to you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Kate and Amanda. I don't know if everyone's going to have my screen pinned on there or when I'm speaking.
I'm going to spotlight you, Rhiannon, and I'm just, do you want to share your slides, or do you want me to, I can bring them up actually, because, give me 1 second, I've just spotlighted you.
If you're able to share, that'd be really helpful, and I'll just say
Of course.
to move on.
A moment. Okay. And
so while they're coming up, I'll introduce myself. So thank you for having me back. It's always a pleasure to speak to people about trauma-informed practice in different settings. My name's Dr. Rhiannon Lewis. I'm a consultant clinical psychologist. I work part-time in the NHS. I'm the clinical lead for a trauma-informed specialist service in South East London. We provide access to mental health support for young people from marginalised communities who have experienced community violence and exploitation. So actually a lot of our young people unfortunately come into contact with the criminal justice system. We know there's a disproportionate representation of young people who've experienced the care system both in custody and in our programme. And I also work as an independent expert, majority for criminal courts, again, assessing young people who have had experiences of adversity, who've then come into contact with the criminal justice system. I also do a little bit of organisational work around trauma-informed practice and teaching and training. So lots of hats to wear. I would just in case I say anything terribly political, my views this evening are representative of my own views, not necessarily my employing trust, just to get that out of the way as we're being recorded. So if I won't go over what we mean by trauma, because you all just gave incredible and really good definitions of what we mean by trauma. And I wonder, I guess, when we think about the signs and symptoms, you probably have some good ideas what some of the more outward signs and symptoms could be of trauma through your professional work. You know, we typically think of the either very anxious person, especially anxious client if you're thinking of people you work with in a professional setting, or very hostile person who's experienced a lot of adversity and violence. But I guess we might come on to think about, you know, what are the more covert signs and symptoms that you might encounter in a workplace or professional setting, and also what do other responses, other than the kind of classic fight or flight responses, what do other responses look like? So we'll come on to that a little bit later in the presentation. Thanks, Gemma. Next slide. So when I'm thinking and teaching about trauma in my work as a consultant psychologist, and certainly as if I'm writing about it in a court report, I'm usually talking about quite a serious, most often life-threatening event. We sometimes refer to this as kind of a big T trauma in psychology, where someone's been worried about the threat to their life, and that might be witnessing or experiencing that kind of event, or very, very serious injury, kind of life-changing injury or sexual violence. So although kind of as Amanda already said, you know, trauma can become a bit of a buzzword, as you know, people say, oh, that was so traumatic, but actually when I'm talking about it in a professional setting, I'm usually talking about quite specific events. It can also be, rather than one big serious event, obviously sustained or repeated stresses over a period of time, particularly when we're thinking about childhood experiences of adversity, kind of neglect, emotional abuse, and violence in the home. Then we think about trauma as something that's sustained and continuous over a period of time. Many of you, I'm sure, will be familiar with some Gabor Mate, who speaks a lot about the impact of trauma, and Bessel van der Kolk, who's written The Body Keeps the Score, kind of some very kind of eminent commenters on trauma and what the effect that it has on the body, and also kind of emotional well-being. And I just think this is a very helpful quote to say, kind of, you know, although we talk about a trauma, or in obviously in physical health settings in A&E, they will speak about a trauma is the physical impact on the body. Actually, in psychology and in therapy, where we're not always talking about necessarily what happens to the person, it's the impact on their physical and emotional well-being as a result of the event. So although every traumatic event will be very stressful, not every stressful event is necessarily traumatic, and that will depend not only on the event itself, but actually the person who it's affecting. You know, did they have a relatively straightforward and protective life before the event? Do they have good supports around them? Are there sufficient kind of abilities to process and recover in a healthy environment? And also then, do they have kind of means to move on and recover from the event, or is it ongoing? So it's kind of that multi kind of factor of not only what happened to the person, but what have they got around them, and what is their life like apart from the very difficult event or set of events that may have happened. Thanks, Gemma. We're not just talking about PTSD, of course, but I will go over some of the key symptoms just because they're relevant to what happens in the brain when someone experiences a very traumatic event. So experiencing a very traumatic event does have a particular impact on how the event and the memory is stored, but also an impact on how the brain works. And I'll go on to talk about that a little bit more, but these key symptoms kind of, I guess, relate to the impact on the brain and the brain chemistry. So the reason we have experienced reliving and distressing nightmares and intrusive memories is because when we're experiencing a traumatic event, the normal methods of being able to relay a memory down, or put a memory in our system, or if you want to use the kind of the filing cabinet metaphor, to file it in the correct place so that we can retrieve it later, that breaks down during a traumatic event, and memories are not stored in the kind of traditional way with a time and date stamped on them, so they can be retrieved easily, which means they also pop up and they bother us at times that we wouldn't want them to, and they feel like they're happening again. The symptoms such as hypervigilance, or kind of being very on edge or easily startled, is due to the kind of the overactivity of the amygdala or the threat system, when you've experienced a lot of traumatic events in your life. When we speak about avoidance, we might be speaking about literal avoidance, things that remind you of the event, but also emotional avoidance, or using substances to numb emotions. There's an impact on the ability to regulate emotions, and there can be long-term impact on people's kind of personality and way of being able to navigate relationships in their life. So, you know, PTSD, I suppose the classic symptoms are often that someone's jumpy and they have flashbacks. Those are things that you'll often see portrayed in films, but we know that actually it's a lot wider than that. People often have comorbid depression and sleep disturbance, and can have a kind of a very difficult impact on many aspects of life. I would never diagnose PTSD until at least 3 months after the traumatic event has resolved, if you like, because some of these symptoms are actually very functional things. If you're in the middle of a threat right now, if I was in the middle of a very threatening environment or in a war zone, it would be very helpful for me to be hypervigilant and on edge, and for my brain to be concentrating on survival rather than higher order processing. Those would be entirely functional things for my brain to be doing. But if the problem, or if the trauma or threat has resolved, it's no longer helpful to me, and that's when we think about it in terms of a long-lasting disorder, or kind of or a more significant emotional impact. I have a colleague who will always say you don't treat trauma on the front line, and that's as true as it is for war veterans as it is for people who are living in frightening and threatening situations kind of in their everyday life. It's very difficult to make an impact on these symptoms if the person is still undergoing threat and needing to use survival mechanisms. Can we move on to the next slide? Thanks. So what is this impact on the brain? I'm going to try and demonstrate something with my hand, but you might not all be able to see it very well. But often when I'm talking about trauma in the brain to teenagers, which I spend quite a lot of my time doing, or even families and parents, a really good way to model the impact on the brain is to think of your brain a little bit like a fist, if you can see my hand here. So if we've got the amygdala, which is your threat system or your alarm system, is kind of down the back of the thumb here and down your wrist, goes into the goes down your nerve and then controls functions into your body. And then the higher order processes, so the prefrontal cortex, which controls kind of problem solving and planning and organization, is the top part here. So the front of your brain and not over the top. When the amygdala is activated, or when a threat is detected by your brain, it will take control, and these higher order processes will go offline. Literally, also, they won't be getting as much oxygen because your amygdala is making sure that oxygen is going to the rest of your body where it's needed to run away or fight. And Dr. Dan Siegel will refer to the process as you're flipping your lid. So he'll literally say, you know, these higher order processes, they're not available, they're offline, and the amygdala is in control. So that's very useful if we need to act very quickly. If someone was to run into my room now with an axe, I really want my amygdala to be in control. It will help me do something very quickly without overthinking it. However, if the threat is sustained over a very long period of time, it affects how the higher order processes are able to develop healthily, which is why it's particularly a problem if a young person has lived in trauma and adversity over a really long period of time. Then their higher order processes develop less well than we would want them to, and their amygdala is in control too much of the time. So I'll sometimes talk to teenagers that I work with as them having it's a bit like having a faulty fire alarm that goes off every time the toast is burning. It stops being useful, and you can't really get on with life because this alarm is going off all the time. It also stops being useful if there's a real fire, because your alarm is going off all the time. So how do you know the difference between a real threat and something that's more neutral? So those are some of the ways that I might explain to the young people that I work with, you know, why it is that when we've lived in threat or we've lived in danger for so long, that actually our ability to manage those threats healthily and in an adaptive way is really affected in the long term. Gemma, you've got your hand up.
Sorry, I'm not a participant, but I was just going to ask, and indicate to all those in the meeting tonight, you are able to raise your hand, ask Rhiannon any questions. If you have any, put it in the chat box. But just personally, Rhiannon, if I could ask, so is that why, say in a reaction where you might have a fight response, why your brain, let's say there's a text message you maybe want to send, or say there's an argument you've had and you're instant to send those text messages because you aren't able to think through thoroughly what you might be able to do if, say, you took that hour to pause or that time away to revert back to the conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. If your threat system's been activated, and especially for those of us who I did mention earlier, but I've also got experience of the care system. For those of us who've got experience, like early experiences of unpredictable care or abandonment, something as simple as a text message or a message from a partner, or it can trigger our threat response because all of those past experiences come back, and so our thinking brain at that point is not necessarily online. We need time to regulate ourselves and calm down before we can actually take action and think things through. So that's exactly what's happening in that moment. And yes, please do ask questions as I'm moving through.
So Rhiannon, I don't know whether we'll have time, but we do have the hand brain. We have an animation of the hand brain model.
Yeah, we're going to send that out to everyone after, Amanda. Everyone's going to receive the video.
Are they? Okay.
Yeah. All
right. I'll shut up then.
Yeah, it's a really great video if people want to kind of think about how they might explain that to someone else. Dan explains it in a really lovely way, and I think it's great that I've always got a therapeutic tool with me to explain it.
And
if there are no other questions, we'll move on to the next slide. And I guess just a note on complex PTSD, because it's a topic that's coming up more and more. So in 2018, a new diagnosis was added of complex PTSD to the ICD-11. I guess this is probably more helpful for those of you working criminal and family courts, just to know that, like, in psychology and psychiatry, there's a bit of a discussion around complex PTSD being a much more appropriate diagnosis or label for people who've undergone chronic experiences of trauma and neglect and abuse in their lifetimes than borderline personality disorder and emotionally unstable personality disorder, which can be quite stigmatizing. And we think, or the thinking is that if you experience such prolonged or sustained trauma and abuse, it really does have a very profound effect on your sense of identity and integration as a person, and ability to kind of manage your emotions and relationships. So it's not defined by the type of trauma that you've had, but it is more common in survivors of childhood abuse who experience kind of chronic and prolonged threat. I'm not going to go into it in great detail, but just because people may be hearing the terminology shift and change, and that's the kind of the discussion that is happening around that newer diagnosis that's related to trauma. Thanks, Gemma. Okay, so how does this apply kind of more widely outside of PTSD in the general public? Well, many of you will have heard of the adverse childhood experiences research. It's kind of gaining a lot of attention and traction, and it's really to highlight that people who experience adversity in childhood, and so we can be thinking about physical abuse, emotional abuse, neglect, parental mental health difficulties in family members being involved with criminal justice. But also in my setting, we often think about experiences of kind of fleeing war zones during children's lives, or experiences of prolonged systemic racism or oppression. All of these things can have an impact on people's health outcomes in later life as well, and other social outcomes. So some of these are quite shocking, I think, that if you've experienced 4 or more adverse childhood experiences, you're 20 times more likely to have been incarcerated or come into contact with criminal justice. But as someone who I work in those settings, previously worked in Feltham Young Offenders Institute, I don't think I met a single young person in that setting who hadn't experienced really, really difficult adversity and quite serious experiences of trauma in their lifetime. So it's both shocking but also not surprising, I guess, if you work in this field. I guess a word of caution, it was a population level study. It's not designed as a kind of a questionnaire or a screener for these outcomes. We're not saying that if you have 4 more ACEs, these things are inevitable. They're just unfortunately more likely. But if you have a range of protective factors and kind of reparative experiences in your life, of course, these outcomes are not inevitable. And, as someone who would be able to tick the box of 4 or more adverse childhood experiences, I've been lucky not to have most of these outcomes, other than unfortunately slightly higher blood pressure, but that may also be a result of working in a really stressful environment. But unfortunately, I do have family members who have had some of these poor outcomes as a result of kind of more prolonged experiences of being in care systems and experiencing trauma. So it really goes to show that it's not inevitable, but if you have a really difficult start in life, then your likelihood of having these experiences later is unfortunately higher. For the mentees that you're meeting, the really positive thing is that they've had some really reparative experiences. They're off to higher education. They're following a career path, and so I think it's really important to hold in mind the other side of the coin as well, because it can be a bit depressing reading all these statistics about ACEs when you're in a group of people who also experience them. Next slide, please. So when we think about the impact of the brain of prolonged experiences of trauma, I think this is quite a shocking but very impactful picture. So this comes from, as Amanda mentioned earlier, it comes from the work around the children who were placed in Romanian orphanages and had really quite prolonged and chronic neglect early in life. So, you know, when we talk about trauma having an impact on the brain, we really do mean that it changes the physical development of the brain on quite a profound level, or can do. I guess the positive side is that children and young people's brains remain plastic, if you want to use the term of neuroplasticity. They can recover with kind of care and nurturance and access to education and positive experiences, even when there's been kind of early adversity. Children's brains continue to grow and develop. In fact, we don't stop our development until the age of 25. Which I think is just quite encouraging, that even if there is early adversity, there is a possibility of recovery as well. But we can't underestimate the impact on brain development of having kind of very, very early difficult experiences.
Rhiannon, what do you feel is the best method of recovery? What would some examples of that be?
Oh, a safe place. A safe place to be, and a nurturing environment, and access to education and support to manage emotions. And you know, some people do get that, but unfortunately a lot of the young people that I work with have continued not to have a safe place, have had I know we'll talk about the word placement, but have multiple placement breakdowns and just don't get to a place where they experience relational safety. Because of course, when we talk about safety, we don't just mean physically safe, we mean safe and nurturing relationships as well.
And if we look at the relationships that the mentors are going to have with their mentees, bearing in mind it's a coach, not a rescuer, and we're going to send a webinar out to all the mentors on that. Is there sort of some tips you could give the mentors now in terms of the individuals they're going to be working with, which I will back you up on your point, Rhiannon, they are very progressive and they're at a very, very good place. A lot of these individuals, or the mentees we're matching each of you with, are in university, either at the end, some already on bar courses, some already doing their SQE. This cohort of 50 mentees is very, very impressive. So they are a bit more progressive than some young people just coming out the care system. But what would your tips be for mentors?
I'm just aware Amanda was going to jump in with something.
Yeah, I was going to jump in.
Yeah.
Sorry. I mean, my tip is to be consistent. So if you and you've probably already been told this, but to be consistent, if you have a meeting booked or a session booked, then make sure that you show up, because I think that many young people will have had, no matter where they are in their lives now, people who've repeatedly let them down, and that lack of consistency. So if you say you will do something, make sure you do it. And we all have incredible pressures in terms of our workloads, and unexpected things happen when we are told we have to draft submissions overnight. Not so much now, but in terms of our workload, we can, there are a lot of pressures on us. But if we let our young mentees down, they're not necessarily going to understand, or they might say they understand, that we can't do something because of another overwhelming pressure. We have to make sure that we've got the time to do what we say we will do. Does that sound about right, Rhiannon?
Yeah, I think that
Agreed.
About consistency is really, really helpful. You know, we sometimes say, but in our professional setting, you know, do what you say you will, and also say when you can't. Say sorry if you can't. Just be very transparent. I think in the second bit of my presentation, I've got some specific tips for if you're worried about someone experiencing stress in the moment, but I'll go on to those when we get there, if that's okay.
Yeah. And what I if I can just add, Rhiannon, from my experience of having a mentor, and what I've found really valuable is to always be transparent. Like when I even coach trainee social workers, I say to them, it's okay if you can't do something, but don't try pretend that you can. Because this whole concept of, for a lot of young people that have gone through the care system, this over promising and under delivering is a thing that we've been most I guess exposed to. So when you can't do something, and we're quite good at sort of sensing that to be the case. So is all I will just say, and if you ever hear at some point Judith Denton speak, who's the CEO of the Black Care Experience and the Transformed You Hub, she talks about this concept of just keep it 100. Just keep it 100 with us, and we will understand.
Yeah, I think that's really, really helpful. Thank you, Gemma. So we've talked about what happens in the brain immediately when you're feeling stress, but this is just kind of, I guess, an outline of what some of the long-term health impacts can be of sustained stress. And I guess I haven't included it here, but it is in the video that you're going to play as well, that when those signals go off on the brain, it sends various signals around the body that will change messages getting sent to the muscles, to the stomach, to the heart, and that's great in the moment. We absolutely need it in the moment to kind of manage a very frightening experience, but the long-term and sustained impact of some of those messages that get sent around the body can result in quite difficult long-term health experiences. Okay. Next slide. Thanks. Oh, well, there you go. Just on time. We're going to go to the video so I can stop talking for just a second.
Oh, that's not a good sign. Give me 1 minute. I can locate it.
I hope it's going to work okay. It worked fine in the room.
Give me 1 second, guys.
Whilst Gemma's finding it, I'll just let you know that this animation or this video was designed specifically to help train lawyers about trauma responses. So it's specific to what happens in the court environment, but really, really useful because it highlights the physiological responses. If we can get it. You'll know how to do this, Gemma.
Rhiannon, you might need to bear with me because tech.
Do we need to move on to the next couple of slides and then?
Yeah, we may need to, and I'll try locate it.
Break.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Slides back up.
Yeah, wonderful. And so this is really, you're going to get all these slides after the presentation today, as well as, are you going to send out the packs as well, Gemma?
All the mentors should have already received those, so they've got that pack with them.
Great. So we've talked about what fight and flight can look like in the moment in terms of kind of running away or literally fighting. But this is a really helpful page because it talks a little bit about what you might notice in the work environment if someone is in their threat mode. So if people are kind of very overwhelmed or finding work a quite difficult or threatening environment, see these are some of the things that you might notice in yourselves or your colleagues. We can all definitely be pushed into these responses. So someone in fight mode or who is in a very kind of over aroused and kind of aggressive state a lot of the time might appear like a bully in a work environment, be quite controlling, defensive, kind of seem like they're quite entitled in that environment. If someone's in flight mode, they might be kind of very rushing, very busy, filling every spare moment with things to do and tasks to complete. They might be kind of over controlling, but in a slightly different way, in like a kind of a micromanaging way. And they might be kind of a perfectionist and overachiever, or be quite anxious if things don't seem to be going their way. If someone is in freeze mode, they might be much more cut off, dissociative, taking lots of sick leave, turning up but not seeming very present, kind of procrastinating, avoiding tasks. And if someone's in fawn mode, so this is the kind of the mode where people are overly people pleasing to avoid threat. They might kind of seem to be like the person who always kind of gives in to others, can't stand up for themselves, seems a bit of a pushover. So I think these are really helpful in normalizing kind of points to think about fight and flight outside of just that immediate threat response when something very difficult is happening, and actually what happens when we become kind of burnt out or overwhelmed in a work environment, because there's probably things here that we can all relate to from a certain extent. And I think particularly helpful to think about is the fawn mode. Young people who have gone through adversity early on in life but have learnt to that the most helpful way of avoiding threat or harm is by being the people pleaser or being the diplomat, or kind of making sure that everybody else is happy, are people who do end up in helping professions. It's kind of known that if you have that reaction, then you're going to be overrepresented in professions where you have to do things for others or take care of others or take lots of responsibilities, because you've learnt that that's your role in life. Although that wasn't your role in life as a child, you've become very familiar with it, and it's quite easy to take on that role in a professional life as well. It's certainly something that I relate to and can notice in myself. If I'm feeling overwhelmed, I'll be much more likely to kind of try and keep everyone happy to avoid conflict. So it can seem like a skill, but it's also means that the person doesn't get their own needs met, and that can have quite adverse experiences kind of later on. I just wonder, anyone can write in the chat or stick their hand up if they recognise any of these things in themselves when they're feeling overwhelmed, or kind of feel it, or notice that kind of work is getting on top of them, that they might slip into some of these reactions. I can see a nod. Someone's. Or was there a hand up very quickly and then it went down again? Yeah. It's a thumbs up. If anyone would like to kind of share anything they recognise. Yeah, we had a hand up there as well.
I think that was Lizanne. She's going to hate me if she just accidentally did that.
Hi there.
Oh, who's that? Is that Aga?
Oh, it's Aga. Yes.
Hey, Aga, we'll be on to you in just a second. We're just in Q&A at the moment.
That's fine. No, sorry, it wasn't a question. It was, has anybody experienced any of those? So it was just a hands up to say yes, I can recognise that.
Great. Oh, and Zoe's got her hand up.
I was just going to say, I think a lot of these elements are elements which are things that drive us as lawyers, in many ways. So the obsessive perfectionism and the always wanting to do well in the fawning, possibly some people might have some of the fight aspects as well. I couldn't possibly comment on that, but there will be some lawyers who are like that.
Yeah, and I suppose to say that, when these are just personality traits and they're kind of like in the normal range, we're not worried about them. It's when someone is overwhelmed and pushed into these responses in a way that stops working for them and isn't helpful. So of course they're not all pathological, but they can be a sign that something's not working for someone if they're over reliant and can't break out of these modes of being, especially if they flip over from kind of work to home life as well. And so yeah, helpful to be aware of. I know I've come to the end of time, Gemma, and that also the other presenters are here, so I think this is a fine place to stop, and then we'll come on to the second part afterwards.
Amazing. I can't believe it, guys. We're on time. Can everyone just put a bit of claps in the chat, because this is amazing for lawyers who care. So I'm just now going to pin Aga and Sharon, I'm just looking for you guys. Give me just a moment. I'm just trying to find you on my screen. I think you'll be on the last slide. Aga, I see your wonderful face. Let me just add you to Spotlight. Rhiannon, I'm sorry, I'm taking you out of Spotlight. It's like a game show, this is, isn't it?
Gemma, is it okay if I would share my presentation?
Of course. I'm just gonna, if it allows you to.
Yes, let me try. Should I try? How about this one?
Yes. So without further ado, everybody, I'm going to hand over to Aga and Sharon from the Aruka project.
Wonderful.
Lovely. Thank you so much. Right, yes, so we're here to talk to you about emotional competency and the work that we do in vulnerable communities and how this can relate to yourselves. And it's really lovely to be here this evening. So my name's Sharon and my colleague Aga is with me this evening. So we're the founders of the Aruka project. We have a reasonably large team. We have freelancers, we have trained practitioners, and we have people with lived experience. So if we move to the next slide, and we'll just share a little bit about what we do. So really our focus, and you've heard a lot from some amazing speakers this evening already, but our focus is again on trauma-informed initiatives, supporting individuals. So we support individuals in prison, we support vulnerable communities outside of prison, we support young adults, and the whole kind of range into the justice sector. And we're all about building resilience and emotional well-being within these communities. We do it in a number of ways. So here on this slide, and we'll talk to you in a bit more detail about it, but I know that you'll want to really focus on a particular aspect of the work that we do. But we do one-to-one support, so in a very kind of trauma-focused emotional resilience building way. We use an integration of health coaching, which Aga will talk to you more about. We provide a lot of education. So you've heard from Dr. Rhiannon earlier around the psychoeducation and some of the work that she'll present later on. So we do a lot of that for those individuals within the justice sector. And of course, we provide CPD related courses, and we're very much about the community because trauma starts in the community and it ends in the community. It's not a single individual in isolation. It requires a whole system approach. So again, sorry, I will skip through this for the presence of time, but you'll be very familiar with adverse childhood experiences, and that's again predicated on what we do within our work. But when we use the Sanford model in the next slide, what we really want to focus on is this kind of how do organisations, how do individuals respond when they have somebody in front of them that is presenting with signs and symptoms of emotional dysregulation, often coming out from either adverse childhood experiences or aspects of trauma that they've experienced in their lives. So, you know, individuals are very good at the moment around realising, because we've had lots of kind of that trauma-informed buzzword, lots of different types of education around that. So realising that trauma is widespread in the community, recognising the signs and symptoms, we're all quite good at that. But actually, this is what Aruka does. We teach people how to respond to that, and also the element of resisting re-traumatisation, because a lot of your clients will be struggling around that aspect of being in an environment and in a system that doesn't support the reduction in trauma. Okay, so just quickly to talk about the prevalence of ACEs within the prison sector. Again, no surprises to you here, but the there was a study done in Wales, Public Health Wales, back in 2018, and they looked at the prevalence of ACE scores within the prison population from the age of 18 up to the age of 65, and very clearly showing that at least 60% of that prison population at that time had an ACE score of 4 or more. We know that it is not a predeterminant to end up in the justice sector, but we also know that actually we need to support those individuals a little bit more than the rest of the population to prevent them going on into the justice sector. The effects of childhood trauma, we know often around, acting out behaviours. So we see that in the classroom environment, we see that in the prison environment, and we see that in the whole range in between. And of course, it becomes a rehabilitation barrier. So we see that individuals within the justice sector struggle to access mainstream services. They'll struggle to access drugs and alcohol services. They'll struggle to access education within the prison. They won't go to work. And Aga and I work a lot with individuals that are prolific users of drugs within the prison sector, because nobody knows what to do with them. And so the methodology we use helps them to break down those barriers and engage in services.
Right. I think, Sharon, that's end of your slides. And over to me. Thank you so much, Sharon, for giving a brief introduction to the to our project. But I would like to start from doing a little disclosure here. Okay, so in the last session we've done, we kind of just presented of what we do very quickly without really putting attention into why we're here and what can our processes that we use and our methodology can add into you guys, the mentors, the people who are working with people. And I suppose the disclosure here is that, first of all, we are not going to sorry, it's not showing the right thing actually on it. I don't know why. Can you see the 4 tiers?
Maybe press next, Dagger. It might be it reveals after.
Oh, no. That's a shame. Anyway, I will talk it through because I know off my heart. Okay, so there is a model of supporting people in the crisis and recovery post a traumatic event or post distressing event. And what it says, there's 4 tiers. And in tier 1, which is the bottom one, is the basic stabilization and safety. And the aspect of co-regulation is really important. And the tier 1 is all about what can we do as a human-to-human interaction to help people to stabilize and feel safe in the moment. And anyone in trauma response, the body system will get that person into that fear, fight, flight, freeze, what Dr. Rihanna was referring earlier, into those states. And we do have capacity as, again, human-to-human interaction to down-regulate that nervous system to a person or with the person in the context of our interaction. Tier 2 is all about, so that's kind of, next step. Oh, just give me 1 second because I think it's opening now. Well, never mind. Is next step. So this is a down regulation with some techniques and tools, and this is what we're going to be talking about. And then tier 3 is all interventions from counselors and kind of psychology type. And tier 4 is about bringing people back into optimizing their health and mental health and well-being. So we are here to share what can one person do on that tier 1. So it's very much about first aid of emotional and psychological support that all of us can do. So I'm just going to bring you back very quickly because I'm very conscious of time here. And I know Dr. Rihanna was talking about that a lot, but just maybe in the different language. So when a person experiences trauma, especially overwhelming or life-threatening events, the body and brain responds with that survival-driven stress reaction. So this is, mediated by this autonomic nervous system, particularly the sympathetic nervous system, fight, flight, and the dorsal vagal branch of the parasympathetic system, which is the freeze and shut down. And, in the neurobiological imprinting is happening. So trauma becomes encoded or imprinted, some people may say, across multiple systems. How I'm seeing this and how I explain to people that I'm working with is when we are in that fight, flight, freeze response, what happens? We take a picture. It's like a, very highly pixelated picture with all our systems, and we remember everything. We remember the sounds, body sensations, smells, images, taste, everything. But we remember that in a very heightened state. So then in the future, anything that will remind us even very remotely of that experience, it will press the button and it will activate us. So that call, triggering. So the multiple system is the amygdala. You were talking about that earlier, the brain's threat detection center. It becomes really hyperactive. So tagging the traumatic events as dangerous and encoding emotional intensity. So we really need to remember what happened that put us into that fight and flight freeze response. Then stuff that happening in our hippocampus. So all the things that are responsible for remembering, so involved in time and the context, and trauma can impair its function. So memories may become fragmented. And Dr. Rihanna was talking about that earlier, I'm sure. And then, of course, the prefrontal cortex, the responsible for reasoning and regulation, and the trauma, it can go offline. And then there is the insula as well, which is governance interception, so sensing internal states that we are in. So trauma can really distort how someone perceives their bodily sensation. And that is really important because that's where our role may come in once we're noticing someone in a particular action. And then vagus nerve and autonomic autonomic nervous system. So trauma gets stored in the body. And this is really important, and it stores as a chronic dysregulation. So hypervigilance, numbness, disassociation, all those things play a massive role. So another thing to really remember is like trauma also differs from normal memory. So traumatic memory is different than normal memory, right? So it's sensory based. Images, sounds, smells, bodily sensation, we really remember that. It's stored in the right hemisphere of the brain, so it's more emotional, less logical. That's why the triggers are get really in the body, and it's not integrated to a coherent narrative. So this is why it's this fragmented. We are not remembering and not linear, so often resurfacing in the present as if the trauma is happening again. And this is why when someone is in the trauma response, that visceral response is so strong. And this is why, and again, because we are not a mainstream therapist in here, we're only helping people in that first aid for stress and trauma. We know from research that sometimes talking therapy alone can fall short, because it addresses the story, this fragmented story, but not always, it doesn't always addressing that somatic imprint. And what we are bringing into a picture here is that somatic imprint that we are affecting with the tools that we're working with. So I'm sure you've heard about that, the Bessel van der Kolk and the Stephen Porges and Peter Levine, all the scientists that working on the somatic aspects have shown that trauma is stored in the body and in the nervous system, and it's not just in the brain. And that's why somatic therapies are really important to know about it and start integrating. So I'm going to skip that because you've already talked about that, how trauma express. I'm going to miss that. But what we're trying to show you today is that first aid for stress and trauma, anything that we can do in the moment. So the co-regulation aspect, which I'm sure you've heard about it, if not from Dr. Rihanna, maybe yourself from other resources, that co-regulation, especially in the mentoring session, is all about creating a safety, is that relational space where nervous system of both individuals are really attuned to each other. And what I'm saying here is that if you've seen that before, if you haven't, this is a great tool to think about what happens when person is, so we in general operate between those three states. So we either in the very calm on the social engagement response in our body. So when we feel and we know we are safe, and that is kind of, we're reading every day whether we are safe, and we're reading that through what we're thinking, what we're remembering, and what our body is saying. And if for a moment we feel that, we are in the danger here, whether that is imaginative or not, we're going to that fight and flight. And then if we can't fight or flight, we go into that freeze mode. So we're kind of navigating between those three states. So as a mentors, it's really important for us to be able to regulate ourselves as well as possible to keep ourselves in that green zone, because then we can engage with people, then we can feel grounded to ourselves and others, and people start reading us, our cues, and start getting that energy almost of us. So it's important to think about that. How do we regulate? And there are different ways of doing that, and I'm sure you're going to be talking about co-regulation in later on as well. But there's a few examples of what we would use in our sessions with people. So if the mentee become dysregulated, and you were talking about, how dysregulation, how that trauma response may present to people, and, if they become anxious, shut down, or emotionally flooded, what you can do in the moment to kind of get into that spirit or co-regulation, first of all, is try not to fix it, the feeling, but stay present. So notice, stay calm, and be empathetic. So that's really, really important. And how are we doing that? We may just notice that ourselves, what's happening in us. Okay, I've noticed someone is kind of, disconnecting. Someone presents a little bit more anxious. What do I feel about it? And then down-regulate it ourselves, and that creates a little bit of more space. Then the mentor may gently name what you are noticing. So that's another great tool that we can use, which is, I'm noticing something isn't right in here, that you've become a little bit more anxious. Can you tell me what's happening? And really just stay with that moment. And then simple grounding techniques. That's the third one. And this is where we're coming in and sharing one particular tool. I know it's we're running out of time a little bit, so apologies for that. But just give me one more minute here.
It's totally fine. You're fine.
Is it? Okay. Oh, that's okay, because I was like running over a little bit. Okay. So the simple grounding techniques, and all of us have grounding techniques that helps us. So some of us are really attuned into a breath. We like to take that deep breath just to down-regulate our nervous system. Some of us will be, doing that on our face, doing little stroking kind of exercises. Very natural thing to do as well, that down-regulate our nervous system on the somatic level. And we are proposing another one, which is really fast and amazing technique. But that is all to down-regulate that nervous system, to move from the fight and flight back into that social engagement. But the first step is learning to measure, learning to notice what's happening and then measure it. So we use different techniques to measure with clients. We would say, we will use different scores and things. You don't have to do that in the session, but it's good to notice, verbalize it, and then offer some solution for it. And what I'm saying here is, if I was working with the clients in the room and I would notice that they're becoming anxious or worried, I would then offer a quick technique. I would say, would you like to try something that will help you down-regulate your nervous system? And they usually say yes. So the technique that we use, and we were coming here to introduce, it's called the trauma tapping technique, and it's a non-verbal tapping technique on acupressure points, and that really safely address that off-regulation when the person is going into fight and flight mode. And it does that very quickly. So within a minute of doing that, we feel down-regulated. There is a lot of research to it, psychological impact of tapping. Many clinical trials looking at, and you've talked about that before, when you're in fight and flight mode, when you're in trauma response, your cortisol level goes up, your testosterone level goes up, your adrenaline level goes up, all the other manifestation like pain, feeling anxious, all the PTSD symptoms may just off-regulate. So doing those techniques, somatic techniques, can bring that down, and tapping is really great technique for that. So we have a few more slides, but I'm not going to go through them. I would rather just offer a quick exercise, if that's okay, and then we can finish with that. Will that be okay, Gemma?
Yeah, Aga, I was just, before I let you do the technique, which, can I say, I actually used this week in the car. I pulled over and used. And I was one of the individuals at the training the other week. Kate was having to prompt me to do it. I was a bit reluctant, but I actually did use it in the car this week, and it worked very, very well for me. But I just wanted to just add a comment, if everyone can still see the slides, and bring it back down to how this could apply in your relationship with your mentee, because a comment was made at the last training by one of the mentors, and very understandably made, was that we're not therapists. We're coming in to mentor these young people or these aspirational lawyers that are care experienced. And you might now be looking at this thinking overwhelmed, thinking, oh my goodness, what have I signed up for? But the best way to explain this and bring it down to how this might look in your mentee-mentor relationship, an example I can give you is that one mentor last week made contact with me to say that his mentee had been applying to universities. Unfortunately, despite his advice not to do so, this individual actually just applied to one. That one was Oxford University. Unfortunately, the mentee wasn't successful, and as you can imagine, it was an overwhelm of emotion when the call was scheduled with the mentor to go over it. And the mentee came on the call feeling very rejected. It had obviously revealed a lot of emotion from past trauma and past experience. So these techniques, especially here, do not try and fix it. So obviously the mentor in that, they knew what to do. This individual's a family practitioner. So he said, I can understand right now that you're feeling overwhelmed, you're feeling rejected, and that's okay. And then he would give his own personal anecdotes to make that young person feel more reassured. And like I said, keep it 100. Once they've come out of that phase, say to them, the statistics show not everyone who applies to Oxford gets in. And, it's about being realistic, keeping it 100 with them. So just to kind of bring it to how that might play out in a scenario, it might be that you've scheduled a call with your mentee and you know they've just come out of a really bad lecture, and it's happened to just coincide with the time you come on your meeting, and they might come on really anxious, really overwhelmed from that call, and this technique that they're going to show you, that Aga's going to show you with Sharon, might just be useful for that alongside the others that Dr. Rhiannon's going to run you through. So I just thought I'd bring that back to apply, and if any of you were feeling a bit overwhelmed even through hearing all this stuff from Dr. Rhiannon and also Aga now, just know that it's not as overwhelming as it seems, but it in effect will kind of take form naturally.
Yes, absolutely. And very often what I'm noticing with clients that I work with, and criminal justice is one part of my career, but the other role that I do, I work with people with very chronic disease and a end of life. So kind of I do a lot of work with cancer patients and stuff in medical field. And very often what happens is people coming into a discussion, and that could be just everyday discussion or discussion about the care or in any circumstances, to be honest, and then something triggers them. And yes, we can have a verbal kind of exploration of what that means, and, you know, bring the evidence that maybe what they're thinking and they perceiving is not right in the given moment. But what that doesn't take away is that internal physical manifestation of that fear. So very often fear, anxiety, you know, sadness, disappointment will come into forms. One will come with your head, so you will kind of create that narrative in your head, and the other aspect will be that feeling in the body. So the sinking stomach, you know, the knot in the stomach, the lump in the throat, the heaviness on the chest, everything that you think about it when you yourself in the stress response, what, you know, how stress manifests to you. So when you are going into that fight and flight, what is it that you feeling in your body? And that is when we're talking about somatic experience. And that's what we're talking when we're talking about trauma encodes in the viscera. Trauma then shows up physically very often. And when we're talking about down-regulating that somatic aspect, is all about soothing the body response. So you don't have to talk about why you're feeling the way you're feeling about not getting into university, but what you can do in the moment is just to down-regulate that feeling, that sinking feeling, that, you know, the heavy shoulders, whatever that you are feeling in the moment. And we know that tapping, especially tapping, that has been first used in the communities that the trauma was too much to talk about. So this particular technique was started with our colleagues and mentors who've been working in Rwanda with genocide survivors, when talking therapists could not do it because it was too much to talk about, and there was too much of physical response when the thoughts about the trauma were in the room. So they were looking for different techniques and tools that first of all will take away that physical pain. And that's how TTT came into life. And now it's implemented in different environment. And we're using that. And we're using in school with children and young adults who don't want to talk, but they feel the feeling and it's too painful. So we help them down regulate. And as I said, I use that a lot with my clients. I would go like, okay, this is too much to talk about. It feels really strong to you. So would you like to try a really quick technique that will help you just to feel safer in the moment? So it's not therapeutic intervention, and I want to bring that up there. So Dr. Rihanna will talk about therapeutic interventions and self-soothing techniques like breath work. You know, breath work is great, and you know, other grounding techniques are great, but you know, tapping is just one of additional one. So it's not therapeutic intervention, it's just grounding technique. So would you like to try really quickly? It takes about 3 minutes to do it.
If you can stop sharing the slides, Aga, then yeah, it would be brilliant to just do that, and then we will go for break.
Okay, excellent. So let's just start from
I
SATS,
can still see the slides.
which is a subjective unit of distress. And when we're talking about subjective unit of distress is the noticing. Okay, so if I'm doing it for my own, I would sit and I will notice what's happening to me. So if there is a thought that causes me a little bit of anxiety, get me into that fight and flight mode, I will notice. If I will work with someone, I will notice that into someone else, because the stage shifts. And I'm sure you have that experience yourself. When you're noticing someone is all of a sudden disconnecting, all of a sudden is sitting a little bit differently, all of a sudden gets red in their neck. So that's the noticing. And it's really important to start from that, because that's how your relationship in mentoring space will enrich and will help that healing of trauma, because you will go, I'm just noticing that, you know, we just talked about that and that created a little bit of discomfort. And they may said, oh, yeah, how do you know? I said, well, I've just noticed that you've changed, you shift your position or something like that, very simple. And then you say, would you like to do a little exercise just to bring you back into that safe space? So that's how it works. So first of all, I will invite you to notice what's happening for you. I mean, you just have a few hours of talking about trauma, talking about potential risks of you know, people that you're going to be working with and what that may mean to you in that mentoring space. So just think about that. You know, did that create a little bit of discomfort for you? Did that take you out of that nice comfort zone of being in the green, and you feel a little bit you just, well, I don't know how you may feel about it, but that's down, you know, to you to notice that. So think about what you're thinking in the given moment just now about it. Think about what the feelings that are created for you. So this is another aspect. You know, some people are really good with describing the feeling in the moment. Some people may not be, but I'm inviting you now just to feel the feeling. And if that is not available to you, then your body will tell you how stressed you are. Are you in the fight and flight mode or not? So, you know, is there any aches, any tension? Just maybe move your head to the left or to the right. Just see, how is your neck doing? You know, how's your shoulder? I mean, you're all hardworking people, so I'm sure there is, you know, some tension somewhere in your body. And again, if 0 is totally relaxed, you know, that feeling when you come out of the spa, I don't know that for a long time, but, you know, like, and your body feels totally relaxed, and, you know, you don't have a clench muscle on your jaw, and your forehead is nice and relaxed, and you just don't think about things. That feeling, that's your 0. And 10 is your panic attack. It's that, you know, you're out of that fight and flight mode and you're going into that freeze, like everything is just like that. So that's your 10. And just put yourself on the scale, 0, totally relaxed, 10, and measure it for me. Measure that in your head. And we're just going to do a quick round of tapping. So tapping is simple. You just say to a person, just follow my lead. Okay. And we start exactly doing this. We tap. Tapping is about tapping. So tap on the side of your hand. And this is going to look really weird. If we all do it now, then that will be really great. Okay, so just start tapping on the side of a hand.
If people can, do put on your cameras. It might just make everyone feel a bit more
confident. That's it.
If everyone's comfortable. Yeah, amazing.
Yes, thank you. And, you know, when breathing is your it's your tool to go to, you can connect that with the breath. You can do square breathing, you can do triangle breathing, whatever breath works for you. This is just additional. It works really quickly. I'm not going to bother you with the science. Maybe that's for another time when we have a little bit more time, but there's a lot of science to it, what it does to the brain and the signals that it sends. And then we start tapping with one hand right here at the beginning of the eyebrow. So when the eyebrow starts to grow, there is a point that we stimulate. And then we move on to the side of the eye and just put attention into that number that you put. What made that number for you? Was that the ruminating thought? Was that frustration? Maybe, you know, we're running out of time and there's break going to be short, and all that frustration that creates, right? Under the eye, there's next tapping points. So I'm just going to talk you through the tapping points. And then under the nose is next one. So there are 8 points on the body that we stimulate. And funny enough, we have now research that shows that stimulates the brain. Next one is on your chin. So there's an indentation on the chin. And keep breathing. The next one is on your collarbone. So if you had a tie, it will be right here on the both sides of your tie on the collarbone. I know it looks really weird. And when it helps, it helps. Under the armpit is the next tapping point. So it's on the level of your nipple. That's where it is. So just here with one hand, that's it. The next one is right on the top of the head. That's it. And then we tap through the points on our fingers. So where the fingers just start to grow. So some people, when they're anxious, they pull the skin of the side of the fingers. And then we go through all of them. Just like this. Okay, and the thumb. Then we go back on the collarbone. And we take a nice deep breath in and out. In and out. And we're just going to do one more round, just very quickly. So our mentor said, you know, if you did the washing, you now do the rinsing on the side of the eyes, under the eyes. And now focus again, you know, on that number, what it made to be as high or low under the nose, on the chin, on the collarbone, on the other side. So just on the other side, that's it. Top of the head. And then we move on to the fingers. Just through the, that's it, through the hand. Pushing the boundaries here on the collarbone. Wonderful. Take a nice deep breath in and out. And again, this is important to be able to do it before and after check, whether that helped, whether that reduced a little bit of tension or not. I mean, you know, there is so many different tools and different people connect with different ones. But this is, honestly, as a whistleblower, we could talk about this forever and bring all the science and the images and why we're doing what we're doing. But we only had 15 minutes and we were grateful that we could spend with you 15 minutes to do that. So thank you so much. And if you have any questions, then please do shout. And we are using it in all over the place, I promise you.
Thank you so much, Aga. It really does make, when you're not on a Zoom call with 50 other people and you're having a bit of a reaction to something, it does work. I used it this week and it just level grounded me. And I will send round slides and any video. The video clip's really powerful that you showed at the last training, Aga and Sharon, in the prison where they're doing it with individuals that are in prison and how that's really effective. So I will send that out to all mentors. Although we are behind schedule, we're not, because I'm going to just prevent my talking at the end being so long. So I'm going to let you all take break. It's going to be for 12 minutes now. So we'll come back at 15:15. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Aga and Sharon.
Thank you, Aga. Thank you, Sharon.
Lovely to see you again. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Hi, Shimron.
Hi, can you hear me?
Hi, Shimron. We're just on a break.
Oh, okay, that explains it. I thought my IT was
So-
broken.
No, not at all. So we're back in about 5 minutes.
Cool, sounds good.
And here
Kate,
comes Gareth.
Oh, wonderful. Kate, I just sent you and Gemma an email, but I'll let you look at it.
Okay, thank you, Amanda.
No worries, Amanda.
I
Hi,
ju- I ju-
Gareth.
I'll be back in a second.
Hi there.
Have I got 3 minutes to go to the loo or
You've
away?
you still got 5 minutes.
Excellent,
Amanda.
right. See you
Uh,
soon.
Gareth, I'm just going to WhatsApp you.
Okay, all right, fab.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back. I don't know if everyone's back yet. Some of you might still be making your cup of tea. Charlotte, have you got a cuppa there?
No, just some water. Oh, I just threw the phone on the floor as well, which wasn't very helpful.
No worries. Right, if everyone's back, could everyone just put a message in the chat just so I know? And if Kate, if you can indicate to me.
You see me?
Yeah, I can see you.
I'm here.
Amazing. Okay, perfect. Zoe, did it get a bit cold? I see you've put the jumper on now. Okay, so without further ado and without delaying any time, it is a great privilege for me to introduce Gareth Thomas, who is going to be talking on peeling back the layers, trauma from the perspective of a foster carer. Gareth, if you're in the room, I'm going to hand over to you.
Thank you, Gemma. Yeah, lovely to see you all. I can see some of you on my screen. I don't have the lovely view that we had last week. I'm at my parents' house in Newport in South Wales, so slightly different view this time. But yeah, it's really lovely to be with you all. So yeah, I just wanted to sort of say a little bit about my background. I'll just try and do about 5 minutes on that, and then we'll leave some time for questions as well. I became a foster parent 8 years ago. That was off the back of watching the Olympics and kind of being inspired by the volunteers there. I ended up volunteering with children as a result of that. 5 years later, that led to me going into fostering, and I became a single male foster parent to 3 children who were 4, 8, and 10 when they came to live with me. They are now 12, 15, are just about to turn 16 and 18, and doing really, really well. When the kids arrived, I loved them immediately the moment they walked through the door, but I really struggled to meet their needs, and I wasn't really sure why. Sometimes I felt like the things I was doing worked and seemed to have a good result. Other times I felt like, despite my best intentions, I was getting it really wrong, and I couldn't sort of put together on my own why some things worked and some things didn't, and why I was getting the response that I did sometimes. And someone said to me, there's this thing called therapeutic parenting. There's a, it's a trauma-informed way of supporting young people who have been affected by their early life experiences in a, significantly negative way. And it was really eye-opening. It just sort of changed our lives, almost immediately, really. And I'm not saying that all of our problems went away, but I am saying that straight away we could start to see positive results from the changes that we were making. And so once you find something like that, you really don't want to let it go. You kind of you latch onto it. So I then went and did every training course I could find. I read every book I could find. Anyone I found who was also on the same journey, I was like, right, you're going on speed dial. I'm not letting you go. And really just sort of found my tribe. And yeah, fully kind of leaned into it. This stuff works. I do not advocate for this as a parent to 3 because it makes my life a lot harder. I do it because I really see the difference that it makes in my children's lives. And ultimately it leads to a much better life for everyone. And the frustration for me now is dealing with individuals and systems that do not understand trauma. And unfortunately, I think we have to be realistic about where we are, that most people that are working with children that have early life trauma do not understand that trauma. I would say the significant majority. It's much better now than it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago. We are moving in the right direction, but we are moving much, much more slowly than I would like. I want us to be moving at about, 1,000 times the speed. We have really good research. We have really good data now. Everything's in place to make this work. And so there is no excuse anymore for why we do not have a legal system that understands trauma, a criminal prosecution system that understands trauma, an education system, a social care system. All of these areas should understand trauma. There is no excuse anymore. So day to day, a lot of the work that I do is with an organization called the Center of Excellence in Child Trauma. We run two not-for-profit independent fostering agencies, amongst a bunch of other different things, including an alternative provision school, a training company, a qualifications arm, loads of different stuff. And essentially what we try to do is deliver as much of that as possible for free, so that that's no longer a barrier. So if a local authority says we'd love to understand trauma, but we don't have any money left in our budget, we're like, that's fine, we'll just come in for free, we'll do it for free. Really, a lot of the work that we're trying to do is preventative. So if we look at the fostering agencies, we are trying to go in really, really early. A lot of my day-to-day stuff is independent, sort of one-to-one work with families, and it's not crisis driven. So we're quite different to a lot of fostering services, where we don't wait for a crisis to happen and then come flying in with a load of support. Quite often, that isn't appropriate anyway. What we do instead is say, look, these young people that are now living with you have had a really tough life. They are probably going to find certain things very difficult. There are probably going to be a lot of challenges along the way. So why don't we just work from that basis and prepare ourselves so that when it's a really tough week, you are ready to respond. You have all of the knowledge that you need. We believe that foster parents are the ones that are doing the vast majority of the legwork here. And so our job is not to be the kind of angel that comes floating in and does all of the magic. It's to support the angels that are already out there doing that work. So a lot of preventative work, a lot of supporting and upskilling parents, social workers, in those kind of areas, trauma-informed training, as I said, free training wherever we can. Actually, I do have some news today. Officially, Centre of Excellence is now a CIC, a community interest company. We've worked for a long time to make that happen, but it's really important to all of us there. Our two fostering agencies have been not-for-profit since the beginning. We are fairly international. So I know Sarah Naish that I work with is in Australia later this year. I've very fortunately been asked to give the Foster Wales keynote at their conference in September. We've also been to Estonia, the USA, Malta, anywhere that will have us, anywhere that will listen about the experience that we have around trauma. We have a therapeutic fostering assessment, so we rewrote the way that foster parents are assessed. We weren't happy. There's a thing called the Form F. It's really, really bad. It's not trauma informed in any way, quite the opposite. So we just rewrote the whole thing, and that's been taken up by several local authorities. We're always working to get more. And it works on the basis that actually, if we understand trauma and we go and we assess someone and there is gaps in what they're able to provide, then let's fill those gaps. Let's provide the training. Let's provide the support. Let's not just highlight those deficiencies. Let's kind of look at the strengths and fill in the gaps. The qualifications I mentioned, and that's pretty much everything. We've got a ton of books. So obviously we're always trying to think, how can we reach the most people? I've put a link in the chat just before while we were on break of probably the first one that I would recommend that people go to. So it's designed as an A to Z. It's written by my colleague Sarah Naish, and it's absolutely fantastic. It's very funny. Sarah's got a great sense of humor. So when you are in a real sort of stress mode and there's a particular behavior that you are finding really difficult to respond to, you can just flick to the exact section that you want, whether it's lying or stealing or kind of absconding or any of these things that unfortunately we see day in, day out. You can just go to that page. It's a list of this is probably what you're finding, this is what you can do about it, and it's all very trauma informed. So we get really good feedback. I just had a quick look actually on the link. I think 1,500 reviews and an average of 4.8 the star rating. So Sarah did a good job with that one. And I think that's pretty much it. I think that's probably a pretty good summary. And I do want to leave time if there are any questions as well. I would love to answer those. Does that cover everything, Gemma?
No, that was amazing, Gareth. And I mean, you're the first foster carer, I guess, throughout the course of all the trainings that we've run that is on this call. So I did want to give mentors the opportunity to, if they do have any questions, I could kickstart just simply by saying, would you be able to share maybe a nice memory you have of one of your foster children?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, 8 years in, so there's a lot of memories to choose from. I do my eldest is very much adult sized. He's a rugby player, so he's like yeah, kind of no longer a little kid. But I definitely have a memory that thankfully a member of school staff reminded me of last summer, which was many years ago. He'd probably been with me for about 18 months, 2 years. Had a really difficult time. Was in 3 schools within the space of about 6 months. And it was just one challenge after another. And he'd forgotten to take some money one day to school, and they went to the park, and they were able to get ice cream. I was like, "It's fine. I'm in the area. I can stop and drop off the money. I'll get him the ice cream myself." And when he saw me from the other side of the park, he came running across, jumped into my arms. I mean, if he did that now, I would be absolutely flattened. So that has to exist just as a memory. But yeah, that's yeah, I can feel myself going a little bit just thinking about it now.
I did as well. It's you showed up, right? You said something, you did it, you followed through. Yeah, that made me a little teary-eyed. But yeah, I'm sure, the work you're doing as a foster carer, Gareth, and what foster care. I did a keynote yesterday at a foster carers conference down in Brighton and Hove. And just the impact that foster carers have is honestly profound, and you won't realize it till they get older, until they start coming back to you like normal kids do, I guess, to their parents and say, I now understand what you meant all those years ago. And really, these care experience individuals, they are just children at the end of the day. It's just we've got more needs that need to be met. And once we've had those needs met, once we've got that safe space and that loving environment, we really can thrive. And you're a testament to that, with 3 children now who are grown up and going off in amazing directions. Does anyone else have any questions for Gareth whilst he's here? If you don't, let's find some, guys. Let's not let Gareth go without a question.
Don't let me off easy.
Oh, amazing. Zoe.
I've got.
Oh. Who was that? Was that you, Jonathan?
That was me, Jonathan. Yeah.
Yes.
Thanks very much, Gareth. Could you just say something very quickly about therapeutic parenting? What the principles are?
Yeah, so I think therapeutic parenting, trauma-informed parenting, there's kind of overlaps, there's different terms. We don't get too hung up, to be honest, on kind of, I would rather focus on what that looks like day to day. I would say that on the ground, in practical terms, it means looking underneath the behavior. So a lot of standard parenting approaches are, okay, a child has done this, so we are going to respond, we are going to change their behavior, and we're going to do that by shaming them, we're going to do that by, making them see the error of their ways, by taking away the things that they love, and all of this sort of, this sounds quite horrible, but actually it's fairly standard parenting. And if you're raised in a loving, caring, you have secure attachments, you're in that environment, I still wouldn't recommend this parenting approach, standard parenting, but you can kind of cope with it. For children that have had early life trauma, they can't cope with that. The attachment that they have with you as the parent is everything. And so I mean, there's a phrase that I use all the time, which is, are we okay? I always imagine my children thinking, are we okay? Is the relationship between us okay? I prioritize that relationship and I work backwards from there. And so it means things like, rather than time out, standard parenting approach, we do time in. So if one of my kids has had a really difficult day in school, when they come home, I'm looking for ways to sit with them. So that might be watching TV. Like, I live in the real world. I have 3 kids. It's hard. I don't live in a clinical setting. So it's very on the ground, real stuff. But yeah, just a change of approach along those lines, all very relationship focused, all very attachment focused.
So Gareth, sorry, it's Amanda. Would you agree, and would you say, because this is how I see it, it's a move away from the traditional reward, consequence, boundary setting, which doesn't mean you're unboundaried, parenting approach, which is what you get on most parenting courses. So virtually all the parenting courses that parents are sent on are reward, consequence, boundary, child start. And that's the difference, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. So this is, I mean, we kind of, with parents, we sort of, whether that's adoptive parents, kinship carers, foster parents, whoever it is, we quite quickly get buy-in on that. With education, we really struggle. So they very much still work on a reward punishment model. Consequences is a really interesting one, because I think that explains it very, very quickly, that actually most consequences are illogical consequences. So it's kind of, okay, you took £5 out of the drawer, so I'm going to take away your Xbox for the next 48 hours. Like, what is the connection between the behavior and the response? Whereas actually, okay, you were supposed to be in at 6 p.m, you came in at 6:30, tomorrow I need you to come in at 5:30, so that if you are late, I know that you're still back in enough time. That's a logical. So we do, instead of illogical consequences, we do lots of natural and logical consequences. And really what we're trying to do there is help the young person connect, okay, this was the behavior, this is the response. And I think that that's really important to help make that connection. Trauma-informed parenting, therapeutic parenting, is not no boundaries. It is not no rules.
No.
It is quite the opposite. It's a real key misunderstanding a lot of the time. And it kind of, if you follow me on social media, you know it's a trigger for me.
Sorry, that was I used that word. Sorry. But the person, the child who took the £5 then wouldn't get the ice cream tomorrow because they've taken the £5 that with buying the ice cream, for example.
Potentially. I mean, then we kind of get into, so for our young people, predictability is a real issue. So, the human brain is a prediction machine. Sorry, I'm covering like, probably a day's worth of training now, but the human brain is a prediction machine. And if you've grown up in a predictable environment, that prediction machine works quite well. It's quite effective. To think, to use, in particular, like prefrontal cortex and stuff is it's metabolically expensive to do that. So we like to predict, we guess, and then only when we get it wrong do we correct. That's kind of how we operate. If you haven't grown up in a predictable environment, then that prediction machine is broken. Effectively, you are predicting things that aren't happening. You don't know what to predict. So actually, if we can do a lot of that work, if we can bring in a lot of structure, a lot of routine, then we are really helping to bridge that deficit and to kind of do some repair work with that prediction machine to say, actually, I know it's been difficult in the past, but life now is going to be more predictable, and I'm going to prove that to you over and over. So simple things like morning routines, for kids to just be able to every morning wake up and think, oh, this is what I did yesterday and I'm going to do the same tomorrow. It takes a long time, it really does, but I wouldn't, I mean, a very front of mind example that I've got at the moment is yesterday my eldest was suspended from college while they investigate something that happened. I am dealing with that. So I was at an event today and someone did say, oh my God, that college do not know who they're dealing with, which I think is probably fair. But one of the first things he said to me is, oh, am I still going to rugby training? And I said, yeah, absolutely. Everything with us is still fine. You're okay. We've got the issue with college to deal with and we need to get to the bottom of that. But you are still going to rugby training. We are still going ahead with plans for the weekend. That hasn't changed.
Gareth, I think that's really powerful, especially the whole point of routine, because definitely for me growing up, I didn't, even things like my dad was quite a severe alcoholic. So I didn't even know what time he was coming home from work, and certain things like what time dinner was just not a guarantee if dinner was even coming at all. So I definitely can relate and understand that. So I am conscious of time. Gareth,
but Gemma, I guess, oh, sorry, just to chime in on how does that relate to our mentors in this virtual room? And I think the point is that we have kept coming back to it, but it's about showing up, being reliable. If you've said you're meeting them, don't let them down, don't cancel at the last minute, because we've talked about, the brain rewiring itself because these young people have it, or these people, they don't necessarily need to be young, have experienced trauma. They're going to be predisposed to assuming they're going to be let down. They're going to assume that you're not going to deliver, and we really need to show that we're always going to be reliable and we're always going to show up. So if there's one thing that you take away from this evening, it's just, be reliable. If you can't be reliable, keep them informed, tell them what's going on, be honest, so that you can be a reliable person in their lives. So thank you. Sorry, Gemma, but I think that does give us a chance to thank Gareth so much for that contribution, and allow us to go back to Rhiannon.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Gareth.
Thank you so much,
Gareth.
Thank you,
everyone.
That was brilliant.
Please do put the link in the chat, Gareth, because that book's absolutely brilliant.
He's already put it in. It's
amazing.
It's on Amazon. It's on Amazon Prime, more importantly. Thanks, Gareth.
Amazing.
Thank you, everyone. Lovely to see you.
Rhiannon, I'm going to hand back over to you now. I'll just bring
Thank
up
you
your
so much,
slides.
Gemma. So I'm also going to drop in the chat a link, or it just says home, but actually it's a link to Beacon House, which are another amazing trauma-informed organisation who have lots of wonderful resources that are completely free for people to use, either in the kind of the mentoring situation or with their own children. And oh, have we skipped forward a couple, or we?
Sorry, I was going to say, where am I starting from?
So I think this is where we're starting from. Yeah.
Amazing.
So I'm going to try and make every point very succinctly, because I'm very aware of the time. But something that I think is really helpful for us to hold in mind when we're thinking about how trauma affects individuals is that these kind of reactions also play out within systems, within teams, within organisations. And I'm sure those of you who work in kind of criminal and family courts will be very, very familiar with when a system is very stressed or under threat. You get lots and lots of conflict between teams, between people, between different agencies. The kind of the blame and the shame that plays out is all too familiar, unfortunately. So I think when you're thinking about your work settings, it's really helpful to hold in mind that sometimes whole systems become traumatized, and that can affect communication between people as well. So sometimes I think how this, I guess, applies to mentors is that in my setting, for instance, when I've got a team member who's very frustrated with a social worker who hasn't done what they said they would do, rather than join them in their frustration, what we try and think of is what is behind the problem, what threats, pressures, lack of resources, stresses does the other person have in their lives that is affecting their reactions. And I think this is a really helpful tool for coaching and mentoring to help people think about what's being played out in the system when they're coming up across barriers, organisational challenges, lack of resources, conflict, blame and shame. So yeah, really helpful to think about that idea of trauma, not just in individuals, but also in families, systems, teams and communities. Next slide, please. And similarly, this is a very powerful quote that I often use in my training to help us remember that when we're thinking about trauma and the impacts over time, sometimes what is actually a threat reaction starts to become encoded as someone's personality. That person is very difficult, or they're very hostile, or they're very defensive. These are things that get said about people as if they're part of their ingrained personality, when actually what we can be thinking about is it's a threat response that's really become very integrated. And that also applies to kind of family traits or family situations. For example, in my family, there's a bit of a narrative that women in our family need to be very strong, they need to be survivors, they need to be very, very independent, which are wonderful traits, but also the reason that might be is because of kind of actually intergenerational trauma. And whether it's still serving us to be hyper independent women at all times, is something I think that's really helpful to reflect on. And that can also apply to whole communities and kind of what becomes encoded as a cultural response, for example, a lack of trust in services in my professional setting, is also partly due to kind of intergenerational and community trauma responses. Next slide, thanks, Gemma. So, and I think that Gareth's already kind of touched on this, and what do we really mean when we talk about trauma-informed systems? It's a bit of a bugbear of mine that someone will go on a one and done trauma training and say, we're all trauma-informed now because everyone's done this webinar, when actually what we're talking about is trauma awareness. And it's great you're all very trauma aware after today, but actually unless you're working in an organisation that has a whole systems approach that's really embedded responsivity to trauma and the impact of that at an organisational and a policy level, then be very sceptical of people who say that they're trauma informed unless they've thought about, you know, what does it mean to someone who's walking into our service for the first time, who's employed by our service, what staff support mechanisms do we have? Because those are the things you'd really want to be seeing to call an organisation trauma informed. And the last note is that trauma specific treatment is what we talk is therapy essentially. So trauma informed is not the same as trauma specific. One of the things that I would talk about in more depth if I had time is just to kind of this awareness of I guess vicarious trauma. As someone who's worked in the NHS for too long now, over 20 years. This is something that we're very aware of in our workforce. I also work with a lot of youth workers who have lived experience of the criminal justice system, and we're very aware of it for that workforce. But I think it also applies to your own workforces. Vicarious trauma is something that can impact people basically when they have continuous exposure and in a way that you need to employ some empathy around stories of violence and trauma. So these are just things, I guess, to look out for ourselves, but also for your mentees in terms of kind of the impact of hearing those stories, witnessing those stories, reading about very difficult casework for those of you, particularly in family and criminal settings, probably not quite so much the corporate law setting, that this can have a real impact on your ability to kind of keep going and stave off things like burnout and compassion fatigue over a long period, and really important to be aware of. It's something that's happened, it's affected me personally, and it affected me at a time in my life where I had unfortunately several bereavements happening. And I think it is that kind of multiple pressures of when things are really tough and you're doing a really tough job that requires lots of empathy and resilience, but also things are happening in your personal life that affect your resilience. That's more likely that these things will creep in. So, you know, if you're taking care of other people, you're looking after your mentees, do also think about how you're looking after yourselves and be mindful of these kind of, I guess, signs that you might be becoming overwhelmed, and perhaps reach out to you know, the wonderful team that you've got around you to think about how you balance that supporting others with supporting yourselves. There's some lovely tips about how you might do that and how you might support your mentees to build resilience in the workplace. We had a really interesting discussion last time about, you know, how you build resilience. You do over time with good support mechanisms. It's not something, don't learn resilience in a webinar. Resilience comes through struggling through adversity and building skills and tools over a long period of time. But there are absolutely things that will support that resilience, and you know, being a mentor to these very kind of aspirational young people is part of what is going to help build them resilience in the workplace. I think I'm coming to my possibly final couple of slides. When we think about recovery from trauma, we mentioned this earlier, you know, that thing of building relational safety is absolutely the first step, and it's kind of really, really key in terms of creating the groundwork for people being able to process and move on. Next slide. I don't think we have time, unfortunately, to go through the whole of the window of tolerance, but this is a really, really lovely tool. So we'll go back to the previous slide. I'll just really, really lovely tool and way of understanding when we're coming out of our comfort zone, and actually when our resilience might be shrinking a little bit. It's, you know, it's not a diagnosis tool. We all have a window of tolerance in which we can manage stress. When things are good, that window is better. When stress is kind of overwhelming us, that window shrinks, and we might be kind of going up into hyperarousal or down into hypoarousal. I think there's going to be some more workshops on building resilience, but which might touch on some of these ideas as well. And the lovely tapping technique that was demonstrated earlier is one of those short-term grounding or self-soothing techniques that we can use for ourselves, or we can support our mentees with, that will kind of do that short-term step to kind of building back up the window of tolerance when it's feeling very shrunk, before you can move on to those longer term strategies, of which that trusting relationship is absolutely one of those. There's some specific kind of steps in the packs that you've been sent around how, if you were in a situation where someone seemed like they were very out of their window of tolerance and dysregulated, how you might approach that conversation. So it's kind of laid down in quite a stepwise process. Thank you, Gemma. Last thing that I'm going to mention, and I know this is something that if Lucy was here, she would very passionately be speaking about as well, is that positive that actually, you know, you're working with young people who've gone through some processing and recovery from trauma already. And the idea of post-traumatic growth, or, you know, taking what's happened to you and using it to kind of motivate yourself to do meaningful and kind of transformative things in life is a really, really powerful idea. You know, I think many of us involved in these trainings and kind of and who come across this organisation can very much relate to that idea that overcoming adversity and then using it as a tool in your career or in your working life or to support other people can really be part of a recovery journey that can be really positive. It's certainly something I relate to in my work. And so if there's some more resources at the end, I think, of the slides, if you like to kind of read up a bit more about the idea of post-traumatic growth. But I think it's something that your mentees will probably be quite familiar with if they've gone through adversity and thinking about, you know, how are they using those adverse experiences to kind of spur them on into the next stage of their career. And I think that is me, Gemma. Is that it?
I'm just seeing now. Yeah,
there you go.
Rhiannon, thank you so much. As always, I am just going to stop sharing. I think it has. I think on behalf of myself and, well, all the lawyers who care team and everyone in the call, your insights are always invaluable, and I think you're best placed in all these conversations to lead that conversation. I can see people are clapping, so thank you so much for giving up your time today to come and speak to all the team. We do have, that's fine, if we could actually do a couple minutes of questions for Rhiannon, if anyone does have. Charlotte, I think you had your hand up, or was that you just clapping?
But yeah, it's a nice, I mean, obviously it's not as easy to all be in the same room. That makes it easier for people to come in and ask questions. But if you have any questions, please do feel free to either put them in the chat or raise your hand and ask them. I'll just check now whether anybody has come in. Well, I just catching up on the chats. Relational safety first is being endorsed in the chats. Shimron, who's joined us, who's one of our brilliant steering committee and does so many phenomenal things behind the scenes. Thank you for joining us, Shimron. Mentioning good advice and not a single belt mentioned. Yeah, regrettably, a lot of children have experienced that, as Amanda alluded to, that reward and consequence parenting that often had very serious consequences for them. So thank you for sharing, Gareth, and thank you, Rhiannon. Certainly for me, I think something that I've really taken away from what you're saying is that encapsulation of trauma and how that it starts to be reinterpreted as behavior or family traits or cultural behavior. And I think actually it's really important for us to really step back and recognize where different behaviors coming from, and maybe just to share and reflect with the group, what does this mean for you as mentors? Because sometimes you might be thinking, but how is this going to affect me, and why do I need to know this? Well, trauma may mean that people react to different situations in ways that are disproportionate or seem to be an overreaction to situations that may not appear to you to be something that would justify such a response. And so I think it's always thinking of your mentee as likely to have gone through traumatic experiences, and therefore their reactions to things should always be seen through that lens. And this final slide here is just for us to sort of think about how else might this apply to you. Really be mindful of the fact that we're not expecting these mentees to open up about their experiences. Please don't ask them about them if they're not being volunteered, but they may share after 2 or 3 sessions. So sorry. They may share with you very delicate and difficult information, and that may also be the case in your work, that you are receiving the impact and vicariously being impacted by trauma. And so we do have to look after ourselves first, that age-old adage of put on your oxygen mask first. You've got to look after yourselves. You can't be a good mentor if you are not looking after yourself, if you're not in a good space, if you're not. We had a brilliant talk, didn't we, Jem? Just our last webinar was about thinking about your own emotions when you go into a space, when you're going to be your mentor, or if you're going to have, in that case, a difficult conversation. So be mindful of mitigating secondary and vicarious trauma. For some people, that is talking therapies. That might be something that you want to think about, but that's not for everyone. Setting boundaries, you do need to set boundaries with yourself and with your mentee. And remember, you are a coach, but you don't need to rescue these people, and you don't need to do it on your own. There is a brilliant set of people at Lawyers Who Care who you can come to and talk to, and they will help you work through any issues that arise. So you're not on your own. Gemma, as you have seen, is brilliant. Shimron's online, and he's one of the many people in the background ready to take your call or respond to your email if you need any support navigating an issue.
I think now's a good time to come in, Kate, just to also mention just the Mentor Catch Up and Connects, which are available to all of you as mentors, and they happen every month. The mentees have theirs on the 19th and the mentors is the 18th. It's 6 till 7. It's not mandatory. You can come on for 10 minutes, even if it's just to say hello, and you can jump straight back off, or you can come on and stay the whole time. When we run one, I remember one that we've run, when we had 2 mentors that joined, it was only meant to be an hour and it ended up being 2.5. And really it just,
don't put people off, Jem.
No, I'm not, but obviously people would have left during that time, but it created a space for some of the mentors. It was 2 barristers, in fact, 2 complete opposing chambers. They actually found out throughout the course of the conversation. They went and they were on the same bar course together. But it just showed that it created a space for them to have conversations they otherwise wouldn't be having. You know, I know and appreciate in a law firm, you do have a lot more people around you, but especially as barristers being self-employed and, you know, post-COVID now we're working a lot from home. So you might not have that interaction a lot with your colleagues. So it is just a lovely space to come. I took so much out from it, including just be yourself as a barrister. One of the barristers was swearing on the phone. I'd never on the call, and I'd never heard barristers swear. Well, I won't say anything, Kate. I won't embarrass Kate. But yeah, so it was as great and it was as good for me as it was for them. But it's just a really great safe space for you guys to come and have that support. But like Kate also mentioned, myself, support team, we're always there at the end of an email, at the end of a phone. I do work nights on weekends, so that's why you guys are getting emails at 2 a.m. in the morning, although Kate has asked me to schedule sends for early AM. But yeah, so I'm always there at the end of an email and at the end of the phone if you do need any support. It might be that you're mentee has come to you with it might be that they're having an issue emotionally at that point, and it might be too much of a burden for you guys to take on, that's absolutely fine. We've got a signposting resource where we can point them in that direction, because ultimately your aim or your role is to coach them. It's to coach them into legal careers and to a profession that they otherwise would not get access to without that support. And it's to put them in the right rooms and in a seat at the right tables. And that's ultimately your role. Is all this training has just done is just giving you the background knowledge to equip you in that role and to put you better placed. And for those of you working in the criminal sets and family sector, I'm sure this training has been invaluable in that sense to also know the clients that you may be coming across and working with as well. Kate, do you have anything more to add?
Well, so what happens next, Gemma?
Next, not core principles. So in terms of next steps, I'm getting so excited because I think we're actually ahead of time by 5 minutes.
But you've got to tell them what forms they've got to fill in.
Okay, all right. So in terms of next steps, so you did all receive an email from me yesterday, which had the link to this evening's webinar. Within that was a agreement. That agreement is to be signed in print if you'd like and just scan back to us via PDF, or you can sign it digitally with the link that was included. You are probably later this evening. I'm just going to try and finalize the large bundle, which is going to have all these resources, all the slides from every single presentation that's been done. Basically, it's going to be a huge bundle. I'm just going to finalize that, and I'm going to send you across quite an in-depth email this evening with all next steps and information that you'll need. Considering we've got time, I'm just going to share with you
Can I just remember, so they've got to have done the agreement. We'd like them to complete, if you can, please, the diversity questionnaire so that we can measure the impact the organisation is making. And these are to be filled out monthly. It says quarterly progress report, but I think that's just a typo, isn't it, Jem?
No, it's so essentially these reports are to be done after every session. So one thing we noticed with the last cohort, and for full transparency, we're making a great impact, but we're not being able to demonstrate it. And that all starts with things like knowing how the sessions are going. I recently found out one of the mentees came and done a 3-day work experience at Blackstone Chambers. Just certain experiences I've been getting emails about. We would not have knowledge of this without these forms. So this is something we've chose to implement going forward. So these forms, you'll get a digital copy of this. It's just to be filled out after every session. In terms of describe notable successes and information of the session, you don't need to go into great detail. It's just a sort of broad overview. For example, you might say that we reviewed the CV. That CV is going to be submitted to First Year Skills Development Initiative, a vacation scheme, mini pupillage, and then you just update that in the next one. So these forms are just to be filled out at the end of every session. Obviously, the expectation is 1 session per month for 1 hour. So you'll then send this back every quarter. You can send it back every month if easier. So once you've completed it, just scan it and send it back to us. But to kind of take that burden off you a little bit, you might say that doesn't take the burden off me at all, Gemma. But we've just said every quarter. So every 3 months, basically, you'd send back 3 copies of 3 months worth of sessions that have been completed. But all of this is going to be explained in an email. So the main priorities now is getting the agreement signed. We need that back by Sunday for all the matches and the calls to take place next week. So next week is launch week, which is really exciting. So you will have all been getting links to your team's calls with me. If you haven't got a link yet, do not worry. I'm just finalising the final matches. So you'll be sent a link. That call will be from 6 till 7:30. It might be only till about 7:15. We're going to come on a call. There's going to be 10 matches per call. So we're matching 50 mentees and mentors in this cohort. Essentially, we're just going to come on, introduce everyone, and then put you into breakout rooms with your mentees. And you're going to have ideally your first session there and then, which is really exciting. And I keep getting emails from the mentees saying, when am I meeting my mentor? When am I meeting my mentor? So they're just as excited. And you'll be getting your sent the This Is Me for your mentee over the course of the weekend. So you will get that by Sunday, guaranteed. So once I send out the email tonight with all your bundle, all information, just expect your intro email with the This Is Me for your mentee over the course of the weekend. Yeah, so in terms of just last minute things, for those of you who haven't sent in your This Is Me yet, please do, latest by tomorrow 5 p.m, because obviously I need to also send your This Is Me's across to your mentees, and just get the agreement signed. So agreement and This Is Me's all need to be in by Sunday latest, to ensure that we can go ahead with launch week and doing your intro call next week with your mentee. So if there are any questions that anyone has just on that or logistic wise, please do just let me know.
You've been so organised, Gemma. You have silenced a room of lawyers. I am dumbfounded by this. I cannot believe it. It's so impressive. You've been so organised. There presumably will also be a link to the feedback that we would love to have about this training, because we can only do better next time. So do give us feedback. I'll let everybody just check they don't have a question, but it is a good chance for us to say thank you to our amazing speakers this evening. Thank you to Amanda Muse, who has been phenomenal at creating this trauma informed training and is developing a special guide with Lucy. Rhiannon, again, phenomenal, so amazing. I think we've already lost our other speakers, but thank you to Gareth, and also to the
Aga and Sharon.
Phenomenal Aga and Sharon, who have left me with a quick resource to tap away my stress when everything is getting too much at court.
I think, and then the biggest thank you really to the mentors.
Yeah, to
the
you
training
all.
is complete. Oh, certificates, Kate.
Oh, certificates.
Well, yes. So everyone,
you're now graduates of the Lawyers Who Care programme. Congratulations, everybody. How are we going to give them their certificates?
So for those who didn't attend in person, I'm going to be contacting their MO leads, so the leads of their MOs, and I'm going to send them either to Chambers or Firm, and they'll get you out. So those of you who missed the merch or anything like that, I'm going to send all of that as well as your certificates to Chambers or your law firm, and I'll let you know once that's done, just so you can go and grab that from your MO lead. So your MO lead will be the individual that made contact with you to get you on board as a mentor. So they'll get all of those.
Amazing. Look, I've even got my merch behind me. Here's one of my bits of merch. Can you see it?
No,
sorry.
we can't see it, Kate.
No, that was hopeless. That was hopeless. I think it's a big thank you to Gemma, who is just phenomenal, and we are so grateful for her leadership. And you know where we are. Next step is your matching next week. Gemma is always here. We've got a whole team who are ready to support you, and we wish you all luck with your match, and enjoy being a mentor. And you'll learn more, I'm sure, than you think that there was to learn. I'm sure the journey will be fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, everybody. You are free to go and enjoy your evening.
You're free to go to have your evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very
Thanks
much.
very much.
Bye.
Thank you.